Oh, McQueen. Crazy McQueen.
Played on the screen who have been loners, they've been rebellious a little bit, moody. Have you interjected your own personality into these characters? Yeah.
Steve McQueen was an undisputed icon, the very definition of a Hollywood legend. Nicknamed the King of Cool, his on-screen presence was magnetic, a mix of quiet intensity, rebellious charm, and unflappable confidence that made him one of the highest-paid movie stars in the world. He was the anti-hero audiences couldn't help but root for, a man who lived by his own code. But behind the piercing blue eyes and the cool demeanor, a storm was always brewing. This wasn't the quiet confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, it was the ferocious fire of a man who needed to win at all costs. For all his fame, McQueen was a deeply insecure and conflicted person. His life was a study in contradictions. He craved affirmation but pushed people away. He radiated strength, but was emotionally fragile, and he was the king of cool, but had a temper that could scorch anyone who got in his way. This inner turmoil created some of the most explosive and notorious rivalries in Hollywood history. He was known to be combative with directors, but stories of his feuds with co-stars became the stuff of legend. He would count lines, demand equal billing, and use every trick in the book to make sure all eyes were on him. While McQueen never published an official list before his untimely death at 50, stories from co-stars, directors, and friends have painted a clear picture of the actors who clashed with his relentless need to be number one. These are the shocking, untold stories of the man who had to be the only star in the sky. We're going to count down the 6 biggest names who clashed with the King of Cool, revealing the petty squabbles, the grand betrayals, and the psychological warfare that defined these on-set relationships. The stories behind these feuds will change the way you see some of Hollywood's most iconic films. Let's begin the countdown with number 6. A clash of Hollywood generations that took place inside a towering inferno. By 1974, Steve McQueen was at the zenith of his power. As the highest-paid movie star in the world, he chose the towering inferno, a disaster epic with a glittering, all-star cast. For McQueen, it was a chance to share the screen with 2 of Hollywood's other titans, Paul Newman and William Holden. While his rivalry with Newman would become legendary, his dynamic with Holden represented a different kind of clash between the new king of Hollywood and a member of the old guard. William Holden was true Hollywood royalty, an Oscar winner and a major box office draw for decades. But by the 70s, his star was fading. He arrived on the set of the towering inferno to find himself the third wheel in a power struggle between McQueen and Newman. From the start, the production was plagued by ego clashes over billing and screen time. McQueen and Newman were laser-focused on total parity. They each got $1 million, plus a percentage of the gross, and their contracts demanded an equal number of lines. So, where did that leave William Holden? Despite his legendary status, he was no longer considered as bankable and was shut out of the top-billing fight. The producers devised a creative, if awkward, solution. They placed McQueen's name first on the poster, but Newman's name slightly higher. Holden was relegated to third position, a public statement of his new place in the Hollywood hierarchy. For a star of Holden's stature, this had to be a tough pill to swallow. The set was a tense environment. Both McQueen and co-star Faye Dunaway made it clear they weren't to be approached by visitors, a stark display of star power. While there were no overt, explosive confrontations between McQueen and Holden, McQueen saved his ammunition for Newman. The tension was symbolic. Holden, the seasoned professional, had a front-row seat as McQueen, the relentless competitor, rewrote the rules of stardom. The conflict wasn't about personal hatred, but a symbolic struggle for power, making William Holden the first name on a list of stars who found themselves on the wrong side of the King of Cool's ambition. The set of 1960's The Magnificent Seven was a pressure cooker of talent and ego. It launched several careers. But it was also the battlefield where Steve McQueen first perfected the art of on-set psychological warfare. While his main target was the film's top star, Yul Brynner, McQueen's need for attention created friction with nearly everyone, including the quiet, intense Charles Bronson. Now, unlike other feuds on this list, the dynamic between McQueen and Bronson was more complex than pure animosity. Some accounts suggest they actually got along, as their wives were close friends. They were part of a group of hungry young actors on the brink of stardom, and a certain camaraderie existed. However, any friendship was tested by McQueen's relentless and distracting on-set behavior. Charles Bronson was a man of few words, a professional who came to do a job, not compete for the spotlight. McQueen, on the other hand, saw every scene as a contest. He would fiddle with his hat, check the sun, or rattle his shotgun shells during other actors' lines, especially Brynner's. This behavior infuriated the film's star and started to wear on the rest of the cast. According to some reports, even the famously stoic Bronson eventually lost his patience with McQueen's antics. While Brynner was the main target, the ripple effect was felt by everyone. Director John Sturges watched in horror as his cast, inspired by McQueen, began competing for attention, turning scenes into a chaotic free-for-all. Bronson, who commanded presence through stillness, found himself in an environment where the loudest performer was winning. While some sources say Bronson and McQueen remained on good terms, others claim Bronson never forgave McQueen for what he saw as deeply unprofessional behavior. It was a fundamental clash. Bronson believed in serving the story, while McQueen believed the story should serve him. This professional friction earns Charles Bronson a spot on this list. If Charles Bronson was the quiet victim of McQueen's on-set games, Robert Vaughn was the articulate observer. A polished and thoughtful actor, Vaughn worked with McQueen on 3 films, The Magnificent Seven, Bullet, and The Towering Inferno, giving him a unique long-term perspective on McQueen's personality. While he considered McQueen a friend off-screen, he found the on-screen version of the man intensely competitive and bafflingly insecure. It all started on the set of The Magnificent Seven. Vaughn quickly noticed McQueen's obsession with being more successful than anyone else, especially Yul Brynner. In his memoir, Vaughn recalled McQueen complaining about the size of Brynner's horse and his fancy gun. When Vaughn pointed out that his own horse was the largest, McQueen shot back, "I don't care about yours. It's Brynner's horse I'm worried about." This obsession created what Vaughn called emotional landmines on set. You never knew what would set McQueen off. Years later, when they reunited for Bullet, McQueen was a star. He handpicked Vaughn for a role, but even with all the power, his insecurities remained. During The Towering Inferno, Vaughn watched McQueen neurotically ensure he and Paul Newman had the exact same number of lines. Vaughn came to believe this all stemmed from a deep-seated fear that he wasn't a good actor. Unlike Newman, who wanted to discuss scenes, McQueen was a reactor who relied on instinct and presence. He famously hated learning lines, seeing it as a weakness. Vaughn saw this not as coolness, but as a defense mechanism for a man terrified of being exposed. He believed McQueen was emotionally guarded and paranoid. In Vaughn's estimation, McQueen had few real friends in Hollywood because he didn't want to share the spotlight. He wanted to own it. The relationship wasn't about hatred, but about Vaughn's profound bewilderment. He was friends with the man but couldn't stand the star. He saw the king of cool as a king of his own isolated, paranoid kingdom, earning him a solid place on this list. We're halfway through our list, and the rivalries are only getting more intense. We've seen how McQueen's ego clashed with the old guard, quiet professionals, and even his friends. But the top 3 rivalries represent the most explosive power struggles of his career. Before we reveal the names that defined McQueen's most bitter battles, if you're enjoying this deep dive into classic Hollywood drama, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss the stories of betrayal, jealousy, and revenge still to come. The feud between Steve McQueen and James Garner was different. It wasn't just a clash on a single film set. It was a long-simmering, deeply personal rivalry that spanned their careers. They were neighbors and were often compared to one another, but beneath the surface, their personalities were worlds apart. James Garner had an effortless, laid-back confidence that, according to Garner himself, drove McQueen crazy. He couldn't stand that Garner seemed to glide through Hollywood without the intense struggle that defined his own life. The rivalry was rooted in professional jealousy. Garner was blunt in his assessment, believing McQueen wasn't a true actor, but a poser who relied on charisma. More personally, he accused McQueen of copying his style early in his career. Their paths crossed on The Great Escape in 1963. While the film was a success, Garner recalled McQueen being a pain in the ass, constantly demanding more lines and bigger scenes. But the feud hit its breaking point with the 1966 racing film Grand Prix. For McQueen, a passionate driver, this was a dream project. He was approached for the lead, but his notorious demands stalled negotiations. The studio, wary of a power struggle, did the unthinkable. They gave the role to James Garner. To McQueen, this was the ultimate betrayal. He felt Garner had stolen the role that was rightfully his, one that defined his very identity. The fact that Grand Prix became a hit was salt in the wound. The animosity became deeply personal. One widely repeated, though unveiled, claims that McQueen, who lived downhill from Garner, went onto his balcony and urinated down onto Garner's property. They never reconciled. For years, McQueen held a grudge, unable to forgive Garner for succeeding in the one arena he felt he owned. He saw in Garner an effortless cool that he himself had to work so hard to project, and for Steve McQueen, that was an unforgivable offense. If the feud with Garner was personal, the rivalry with Paul Newman was a clash of Hollywood titans. This was a war between two equals, two of the biggest movie stars on the planet. They shared piercing blue eyes, a love of fast cars, and the absolute pinnacle of the film industry. They did not, however, share the spotlight well. Their feud was a legendary power struggle that defined the making of 1974's The Towering Inferno. The bad blood started in 1969, when McQueen was offered the role of the Sundance Kid opposite Newman in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. He turned it down because the studio refused to give him top billing over Newman. 5 years later, on The Towering Inferno, McQueen was determined to achieve parity. The negotiations were famously contentious. Both men demanded and received the same salary and top billing. The studio's absurd compromise was a poster where McQueen's name was first left to right, but Newman's was positioned slightly higher. On set, McQueen's obsession went into overdrive. He got a copy of the script and counted every line of dialogue. When he found Newman had 12 more lines, he was furious and demanded rewrites to make them exactly equal. He even insisted his character get the final line of the film. Newman was incensed by this petty behavior. His friend A.E. Hotchner recalled visiting the set and finding a dejected Newman, who referred to his co-star as a chicken for his antics and complained that every day felt like going to the dentist. The competition was so intense that both men insisted on doing their own dangerous stunts, resulting in minor injuries for both. Ironically, their off-screen rivalry translated into powerful on-screen chemistry, and the film was a massive hit. But it was the first and last time they would ever work together. This was a battle for supremacy between two kings who both believed they deserved the throne. The sheer scale of their conflict makes Paul Newman the undeniable number 2 on the list of stars who clashed with Steve McQueen. We've arrived at number 1. The feud that started it all. The rivalry so legendary, it has become the gold standard for Hollywood power struggles. Before the line counting with Newman or the jealousy with Garner, there was the allowed psychological war on the set of The Magnificent Seven with its top-billed star, Yul Brynner. This was the feud that established McQueen's reputation as a difficult, scene-stealing menace. In 1960, Yul Brynner was a king, having won an Oscar for The King and I. The Magnificent Seven was his project. His company had bought the rights, and he had casting approval. On his director's recommendation, he cast a rising TV actor named Steve McQueen, a decision he would bitterly regret. From day one, the tension was electric. Unhappy with his character's few lines, McQueen decided to out-tact Brynner with a relentless barrage of subtle, distracting movements to pull focus in every shared scene. The tactics were petty and brilliant. When Brynner spoke, McQueen would flip a coin, rattle shotgun shells, or take off his hat to check the sun. According to co-star Eli Wallach, during one scene McQueen fidgeted so much with his hat and gun that Brynner became furious. The feud escalated. Brynner, sensitive about his height,